Welcome APSI participants and anybody else who happens to be watching this. My name is Michael Yacht and I teach at Rouse High School, as you can see there in Leander, Texas, and I'm going to kind of give you just a little overview, my opinion, and how I'm going to try to teach my students this year with the new APUS history rubrics for the essay section. I'm going to start by explaining the planning and writing. A lot of you that I had during the summer, this has not changed. APUS history increased the writing time from 90 minutes to 100 minutes, and so a lot of my students, I'm going to tell them that now they can shift that 10 minutes into 5 minutes more planning and be comfortable with that, and also 5 minutes more on the long essay. So I'm going to tell them that they need to plan for 25 minutes, they need to write their DBQ for about 45 minutes, and they need to write the long essay for about 30 minutes. The one thing that I will say on the planning is make sure that you might want to talk to your proctors, because the proctors are going to say after 15 minutes into the writing session, at this time I recommend you begin writing your first essay. That should be a little heads up to the kids that you have 10 minutes left in your planning, so you should be wrapping up your DBQ planning and heading to your long essay planning. The long essay format, as you can see, has changed. Our students are going to have 3 long essays to choose from. Each will have the same reasoning skill, which used to be called the historical thinking skill, but they'll still have, each question will have the same reasoning skill except for different time periods. And if you notice on the reasoning skills, they have contextualization. On both essays now, they're going to require the skill of contextualization. I've heard later on we might have contextualization essays, but on the 2018 test, we're going to either have a causation, a comparison, or a CCOT as far as the reasoning skills. I do teach the long essay first. I teach it right after I get done with units, my first unit, which is time period 1 and 2. So as soon as I finish that, I'll probably have them compare and contrast maybe the New England region with the Chesapeake region, kind of give them an idea, see how much they know, see how much they can learn. This is the rubric for the long essay. As you can see, students will get 1 point for contextualization. They will also get 1 point for their thesis. That has not changed. They're going to get 2 points for evidence. A lot of times that means, as you will see, a laundry list of evidence a lot of times doesn't get a point, but if they talk about the evidence, they'll get 1 point, and then if they explain the evidence in much greater detail to help answer the question, they'll receive 2 points. They'll receive 1 point for a reasoning skill and explaining the reasoning skill, either one of those 3 reasoning skills, and then the last point is analysis, which I will cover later on. Writing a long essay, yes, timing is everything. And it must be written with purpose, and it has to be legible. I got to be able to read it as a reader. You could tell your kids most of their essays, they're going to have 5 different people scoring their essays, 3 different people scoring their short answer questions, and 2 different people scoring their long essay and their DBQ. So we have to be able to read it. They have to be able to manage their time, making sure that they do not short themselves. I think last year's 2017 DBQ, the American Revolution DBQ, opened itself up that a lot of kids spent too much time on that DBQ and really shorted that long essay, and they had really friendly long essay topics. So you want to make sure that the kids practice this writing time. I need to do more writing in class, and so in doing so, it kind of helps prepare the students for what they will face on the APUS history exam. Thesis. The thesis must be in the introduction or in the conclusion paragraph only. I teach that my students must put it in the introduction. I think it's the easiest way, especially for the reader, that we don't start off reading with that question like, does a kid have a thesis or not? Don't leave it in question. State the thesis. You will see that my thesis must be a 5-sentence thesis. It really is almost their entire first paragraph, but now that we have contextualization in there, my student's first paragraph is going to be rather thick as far as the number of sentences that are included in that first paragraph. This is what my students are going to see as far as the long essay. I want to see contextualization of what I call the Star Wars version. I'm not going to play the hyperlink that's up there, but that hyperlink is to the beginning of the 1977 Star Wars. A lot of our kids have seen the Rogue One, which is kind of like that in-between Star Wars episode between the 1977 version and what happens next, kind of fills in the blank. And so I always like to say that my kids, on their contextualization, they should start off by saying it was a period of. Set the stage for the reader. Tell the reader what's going on, but I'm going to stress this year, because it kind of says it in the rubric, that your contextualization should, maybe it could talk about things that happened before, during, and after. So I'm going to kind of teach my students, give me one sentence what happened before the time period to kind of set up what's going on. Give me two sentences what happened during the time period to kind of allow this question, whatever the question might be, to take place. If it's like a slavery question during the antebellum period, how did the 1820 1860 really lend itself to be called the antebellum period? And then one sentence after, what's going to happen after this time period is over. So there's four sentences, and then their fifth sentence is going to incorporate the topic of the long essay, and so lead the reader and their attention towards the question. Then they will have their thesis in their next group of sentences, and they're going to take a position to answer the question, explain to the reader in four sentences what the question you are answering and how you will answer the question with your roadmap. You must use the topics and time period from the question, as you will see in just a moment. That means that this particular question or this particular paragraph is going to be 9 or 10 sentences long. That's pretty thick. And so as you can see there, I might be a little sneaky, and we're going to write the word contextualization and strike through it just to give a reader a heads up on, hey, this is my contextualization, and then we're going to put the word thesis in there and strike through it to kind of give the reader, hey, this is also my thesis. So we're going to try to get 2 points in that first paragraph. Now, you must defend your thesis in order really to help to support that thesis, but having that thesis point strong and right in that first paragraph really helps a lot. First paragraph structure, as you can see it laying out, I'm not going to bore you and go through it, but it literally is set up this way, where the first 5 sentences are contextualization. Then the 6th sentence really is kind of the position, kind of telling the reader, hey, this is the question that I am answering. So you're going to explain the question that you're going to answer. And then the 7th, 8th, and 9th sentences, I think, are critical, because you outline your topic. So which topic are you going to talk about to help answer the question, using which reasoning skill? And that kind of leads the reader in, oh, so I know what the second body paragraph is going to be. And you do the same thing with the 8th sentence. Here's my second topic. Oh, I now know what the third body paragraph is going to be. And then finally, with the 9th sentence, you're going to see a little difference. I'm going to teach my kids this year, however, both topic 3 and 4 outline the opposing reasoning skill, because you will see as one of the ways that kids can get the analysis point is if it's a CCOT and they're asking for, the particular question asks for a change in a particular area, but it doesn't ask for continuity. To get that other point, you can talk about the continuity that's going on during that time period. So I'm going to teach my kids, whatever they're going to ask, you're going to make sure you cover both reasoning skills. So if it's similarity and difference, you cover both. If it's causation essay, you talk about cause and effect. If it's a CCOT, you're going to talk about change and continuity to make sure we get both of those points, or the analysis point. This, in most of my APSIs this summer, this is the first paragraph first paragraph that I actually have my students write in my class. And so their argument is the color blue the best color to use when painting the exterior of the house? What I didn't have this summer is I didn't have written into it. And so as you can see here, I've added contextualization into my first paragraph that I will teach my students. So I'm going to have the students, hey, give me an idea of, what goes into possibly painting your house, using the color scheme and stuff like that. And then finally I get into my thesis, making sure that I'm taking a position that color blue is not a great choice. And then I give reasons why it's not a great choice. And then When I finally get down to the bottom, I'm going to make a however statement. There are some times that the color blue could be used. So I'm going to take that opposite viewpoint, which would cover both historical thinking skills that are located here. And so, as I'm not going to bore you and have you and read this for you, you can read it yourself and kind of get an idea of what I'm looking for. This activity I did in my APSIs. This is a good contextualization activity that you can have your kids do as you progress through U.S. history. You know, have them name the time periods. It will kind of help set the stage. It's a period of. So, for instance, like in 1491, it's a period of pre-Columbian. And then the number 2 is a period of exploration. And then in number 3, it's a period of colonization. Now, could you argue colonization in period 2? Yes, with the Spanish and the French and stuff like that. But a lot of times we consider colonization starting with the British in 1607 with Jamestown. So just being able to name these time periods, because these are very familiar time periods that kids might be asked on essays. So they should be aware of there are different names. For instance, you could take a look at number 7 and say, hey, that's a period of Articles of Confederation. Yes. A lot of times I've seen on AP exams, they call it the critical period. So could you name some of these time periods multiple different things, like the Gilded Age or the Industrial Revolution, looking at number 12? Absolutely. The students just have to be aware, what are these time periods called, because it kind of helps them establish their contextualization point. I now have a couple of examples. I did these during the summer, but I've tweaked them because of the redesign to the rubrics. And so that was the first question that I had in my APSIs, and I showed this example, but I've now added contextualization to my first paragraph along with the thesis to kind of give you an idea of what I'm doing. You can see down at the end, the question's asking what are the changes in the labor system. So I list what are the couple of changes that I'm going to talk about, but then I make sure I talk about the continuity. And then I give one continuity, then I give a second continuity that are going to go through. So I'm really going to try to teach my kids, as you will see later on, the kids should have almost like a 2-to-2 ratio on their reasoning skills. 2 changes and 2 continuities, or 2 similarities and 2 differences, or 2 causes and 2 effects. Probably something that I should point out to you, make sure that when students are talking about these questions, and as you can see with this question, there's a time period, 1820 to 1860. The College Board asks time periods for a reason. A lot of times they mean something, the dates mean something, but they want you to stay within the time period. So the main argument of their question must stay within the time period. So on this particular question, it says evaluate the causes. So you're going to have to talk about the causes of the American Civil War between 1820 and 1860. Well, you can't go back to the Louisiana Purchase. That's 1803. Could that be used for contextualization? Yes. But it cannot be used for a main argument. You got to stay with 1820 to 1860. And if you take a look, there should be a bookend when you're talking about this question. It should be the Missouri Compromise, possibly with 1820, and 1860 is kind of the election of Abraham Lincoln. This particular example will show you I did multiple causes. The other way to get the analysis point is on a causation essay, students are able to show multiple causes. Instead of just 1 or 2 causes, they show 3 or 4 causes. Now, I don't have the secret rubric of how many causes the kids are going to have to do in order to get that to get that point, but I would say 2 is not enough, and I would say 6 is too many. I would land between somewhere, where you have, if you're going to have 4 causes, that means 4 paragraphs that you've talked about the causes of something happening. For the most part, I would imagine that should get the point if the students have defended it well and brought in enough information. So as you can read through that, you can see what I did, and then I talked about the multiple causes of the Civil War finally ending up with Abraham Lincoln being elected in 1860. This one here, same question, but this one I did cause and effect, and you will notice what I did with this one is I think students are going to make a mistake if they try to go cause and effect, and so you got to make them aware of this. Their effects also have to stay within the time period. They can't talk about the causes of the Civil War and then the effects is Reconstruction. This question is not asking about Reconstruction. So you can say, what are the effects of one of the causes, or what are the effects of what's going on? And that's what I try to explain here. Two great effects of expansion following the Mexican-American War: radical stances of abolitionists like John Brown in Kansas and at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. So I'm going to really talk about John Brown bleeding Kansas, and I'm going to talk about the Harper's Ferry raid in 1859 as far as an effect. So that's what you want to make your kids aware of, is their main argument for any question must stay within the time period that's being asked. This is what I call my telephone pole planning. I literally created this last year. I think it somewhat works well, especially with the new rubrics. And so whatever the topic of the question is, the kids will write down the topic, and then whatever the reasoning skill is. So if it's a comparison, they're going to say similarity on one side and difference on the other side. And you can see change, continuity, cause, and effect. And then there's 4 topics, which are going to represent the 4 essays or the 4 paragraphs that they're going to have in their essay. For each topic, I have a drop-down menu. The kids should drop down 3 things that they're going to then support that topic with. What are you going to talk about? And just briefly do this. This should be done in about 5 minutes. That's part of that 5-minute planning. So 20 minutes planning the DBQ and 5 minutes planning this long essay. These drop-down menus could be practiced throughout the year. Those of you that were in my APSI, we did this activity where you give the kids a topic and you give them 60 seconds and you say, go. What do you know about this particular topic? So if it's the Missouri Compromise, what do you know? What are 3 things that you could talk about, or 5 things that you could talk about in the Missouri Compromise? This is going to be your evidence. This is going to be the stuff that's going to help support and help to answer the question. I then have a list of questions here. A lot of these that were in my APSIs. These are ones that you could possibly use. This particular question right here is probably going to be the first long essay that I'm going to ask my students this next year as soon as I finish Unit 1 and Unit 2, which is probably going to be the end of September, since we don't start school until August 28th, really late. Those of you who got started early, especially my Louisiana people, yeah, you are very lucky. I know you don't feel lucky at this point, but you are very lucky. Here's just another question. This was the DBQ question from 2015 that's been turned into a long essay. It's not a bad question to ask the kids, maybe just to plan out. I'm not sure to write, but maybe to plan out in April. Get them ready for, hey, this could be your essay number 3 option as far as cause. Then I have some different ones here that you could possibly use. A laundry list on my website of different essays, but these are just some that you could use. I know kids write 5 to 6 long essays throughout the school year, along with 4 DBQs. I'm going to try to have them at least write 4 DBQs and maybe plan out 4 or 5 more DBQs just to plan them. Take 20 minutes of class, so you can open class with planning. Yes, all that for just 1 point, but it does set the stage, and we've really set the stage for all 6 points. The long essay body paragraphs, I talk about a topic sentence, the importance of a topic sentence to my students. Introduce the topic, the reasoning skill, and the time period to the reader, so the reader knows what topic you were talking about. Now, really, they should be able to look back at your first paragraph and see that. Then you have sentences 2 through 8 that are going to now go off and talk about the evidence, your drop-down menu stuff, explaining how they're answering the question, making sure they use that topic and the reasoning skill to answer it. As I have stated there, no UBIs, no useless bits of information. For every piece of outside information that you list, you should explain. Why are you doing that? Add value. How does that piece of outside information help to answer the question? And then finally, the last sentence of their topic paragraph or their body paragraph should restate to the reader, hey, this is the topic, this is the reasoning skill, and this is how it helped to answer the question. ATQ, answer the question. That's what we're looking for as readers. A lot of kids don't. A lot of kids will laundry list stuff and not explain it, and so a lot of times it's very difficult for us to award points at the reading. We are always trying to give points. We're looking to give your students points, so tell them that. We're rooting for them to do this on their essays. This is the reasoning point, what they call corroboration, qualification, and contradiction, and I'm going to let you read through that, but as you will notice as you read through that, there are two that are bolded. Those bolded two topics are what my students, I'm going to focus this year on in AP US History. I think the first one, the second bullet, really opens the door for students to be able to get a point in their fourth and fifth body paragraphs by explaining the other reasoning skill, because it says explain both similarities and differences. So as soon as I see this, it seems like, and a lot of the workshop examples this summer only had either causes or effects or changes or differences, and it seems like they might ask one reasoning skill and then the students, to get that other point, if they cover the opposite reasoning skill or the opposite side of it, similarity and difference, continuity and change, cause and effect, they're going to be able to get that point, and that should be taken care of in their body paragraphs. And then finally, just to reinforce that point, I'm going to continue to teach what I call, synthesis, which it's been called in the last 3 years, and they're not literally calling it synthesis, but if you read that bullet there, it says explain relevant and insightful connections within and across periods. Well, that sounds a lot like synthesis, and so I'm going to continue to teach that. But if you notice down at the bottom, this understanding must be part of the argument, not merely a phrase or reference. So you somehow have to tie it to your argument. So make sure your students are doing that, especially on the synthesis point. I just kind of outline here what I'm going to teach my students. Their reasoning skill should be, 2-to-2 ratio, 2 similarities, 2 differences, and all that stuff as you go through here. The conclusion, it's just a way to solidify the analysis point. I do love synthesis. I've been teaching synthesis before synthesis was actually called synthesis. I've been making these connections in U.S. history. I think it's part of the teaching of U.S. history and why we teach history, to make connections, and the old phrase, so we don't repeat history, or at least we can see things that have happened in the past and might be happening currently. So the big thing is, my students on their long essay conclusion, they are literally going to state blank, whatever it is. So I'm going to give you an example. The Boston Massacre is similar in kind but different in time to the Kent State Massacre. Now it's up to the students to make sure that this is part of their argument, that they show it's part of their argument, not merely a phrase or reference, as I stated down below. And that should take 4 or 5 sentences, 6 sentences maybe. Make that conclusion really good, and in doing so, it kind of solidifies that reasoning point, or the analysis point. 6 rules. I cover these in my APSIs, and so I will not bore you going through these, but just 6 simple rules that you and your students might want to follow as they're going through and looking at the long essay. We understand as a reader that these are first draft long essays, that these are not their doctoral thesis. They haven't had multiple times to go back and correct it. Spelling, you got to make sure that it's in the ballpark that I can understand. Like, I always make the joke that I have a hard time spelling Massachusetts. But if I see that it's somewhat close, I'm not going to count off for it. But if the entire essay is a spelling error and a grammar error, where it's difficult to read, it could affect the way that it is scored. So please tell your students to make sure that they are writing as clearly and as effectively as possible. And as I said on number 6, cover the entire time period. There are reasons that College Board asks these time periods. There was an essay years ago that talked about the labor systems, but it said between 1607 and 1776. Well, most of the kids that year only got to into the 1770s and never made it to the Declaration of Independence, and we all were kind of dumbfounded. Because we looked at 1776, it's like, you should know this. You should be able to identify this date. So make sure your students identify and cover the entire time period. Yeah, the importance of the first paragraph I just have right here kind of shows you. It does set the stage. It is true. Most long essays are probably scored between 2 and 3 minutes. Most long essays, it seems like when I've talked to a lot of my colleagues that have scored a long essay, I've only scored the SAQ on the redesign test. But my colleagues that have scored the long essay have said that a lot of long essays have been short because kids have been spending a lot of time on the DBQ, and so they're not getting as much attention. So make sure your students use that extra 10 minutes to either plan, or they're going to make sure that they're going to spend it putting 30 minutes into that long essay. If they write a 6-paragraph essay, that's about 5 minutes per paragraph. And so you can practice that. Practice just writing one paragraph. Have them write the first paragraph. Have them write a second paragraph. Have them write a concluding paragraph. How long did that take? Where do you stand? Are you able to get your thoughts out? Plan for 5 minutes and then just write the first paragraph, just to see if the kids can actually do this in 5 to 6 minutes to be able to get done in a 30-minute time period. This is my grading scale. This hasn't changed since the summer. I allow my students to rewrite their essays all the way up to 100% if they would like. So if a kid were to get a 2, they could continue rewriting and rewriting until they get to 100. So I think writing is always good, and practice is always good. The DBQ. Yes, truly is a document-driven essay. You'll see I've changed doing a little bit. This particular slide has not changed since the summer. The DBQ is 25% of their APUSH score. Big change is that we know the time periods from 1754 to 1980. So that's French Indian War all the way through Jimmy Carter. Again, 100 minutes total writing time. I think the students should write this essay first because it's worth 25%. 5, 6, 7 is an excellent score. I'm going to tell my students 4, 5, 6. That's what I'm looking for. Give me a 4, 5, 6. Okay, 7, awesome. You got the unicorn. The secret is planning on this particular DBQ or on this particular essay. And I probably will stick with the pattern that I did last year. And I didn't start writing the DBQ until January. We will run in January, 1 in February, 1 in March, and 1 in April. I will probably stick with that, but I will probably also plan 2 or 3 DBQs in class, if not more, just to have that planning time down so the kids know how to plan the DBQ. New rubric for the DBQ. According to me, I think it's very friendly to the kids. There's the contextualization point, that was the same. Thesis point, same. Usage point, there's a big change in the usage point. They get 1 point or 2 points, and I'll explain that when I go through the usage point. Document analysis, that's still there. Outside evidence is still there. The reasoning, showing both reasoning skills, are going to give them a point. And really the same rubric that I just showed you on the long essay is the same rubric for the analysis or reasoning skill point, and then finally synthesis. So I'll go through these points. It'll almost seem like an 8-point DBQ, but really it's a 7-point DBQ. But I'm going to have the kids, I'm hoping that my kids should be able to get, quote, an 8-point DBQ, which means they get a 7-point DBQ, which is perfect, okay? But hopefully they fall back to 4, 5, 6. That's what I'm hoping for. This is what a poster that I'm probably going to make. I don't think I'm going to tweak it much. This is one that's going to be up in the hallways and stuff at Rouse High School. Just explaining, hey, in your introduction, you're hoping to get 2 points there. In your body paragraphs, you're hoping to get 5 points there. And if you notice, so that equals 7 right there. And in the conclusion, they're going to get another point. Well, some kid might go, hey, that's 8 points. Yeah, I'm hoping you get 8 points. You're not going to get 8 points. The best you're going to get is 7. But if you notice on the usage point, I'm going to say that my students have to use all the documents. Well, as you will see in the usage point, there's a little separation on that. On hipping, the students only have to hip 3 documents, but I'm going to make sure my students hip 4 documents to make sure that they get that point, or at least solidify that point. DBQ first paragraph, almost like the long essay. They're still going to have contextualization. Their thesis is going to change just a little bit. Instead of topics, you're going to have groups. My students are going to group the documents based upon the reasoning skills. So if it's a causation essay, they'll group their documents saying these 3 documents are this cause, and these 3 documents are this cause, and that type of stuff. For 3, 2, and 2, to have your 3 paragraphs. That's how my students are going to group the documents, and then they're going to name them in their their usage point. This is the big difference between 2017 and going into 2018. Students should treat the documents, like I say, like someone's gone out and researched for you. Tell your students to quote from the documents. As a reader, we just skip right through it. We already know what the documents say. It's really not, you're taking the idea from the documents. I tell my students to underline and circle parts of the document that they're going to, quote, use in the document. So use the ideas. You can use a couple of words, like if they're talking about the Missouri Compromise, or they're talking about Jane Addams and settlement houses, you could talk about that, but don't literally quote from the document, whatever the document says. I say align the document usage, helping to answer the question with the topics. Parenthetical reference, definitely. When you are using the documents, you're going to parenthetically reference these. It makes it easier for the reader, so they can see, oh yeah, how many documents have they actually used? Notice this. You get 1 point for using at least 3 documents. Now that's different. On the old rubric, you had to use all but 1 in order to get a point. Well, now they've reduced that. To get 1 point, you can use at least 3 documents, and to get 2 points, you get at least 6 documents. Well, College Board seems like they've made the standard that there's going to be a 7-document DBQ. Back in the past, sometimes you'd have 15 documents, but we're going to have a 7-document DBQ. The 7-document DBQ, tell your students to use all the documents. If they use all the documents properly, or if they screw up one, they still fall back and get 2 points. Using the documents. Don't quote from the documents, use the ideas from the documents, and that's how they're going to get the points. And I'll explain a little bit more in detail when we get to the body. Outside evidence. Students have to use evidence completely outside the documents, but I always like to say it can be inspired by the documents. They must use this evidence to help support their thesis. No UBIs, just don't drop stuff in. Make sure that it's tied to the question and helps to answer the question. Explain to the reader how your additional evidence does help to answer the question. And your outside evidence must add value. You should make sure that you're just not explaining to me that the Louisiana Purchase helped to create what's called westward expansion. How did Louisiana Purchase? So explain to me how it helps to add value. On the DBQ, the students are going to have 7 documents, and I think a lot of these documents might spur something, spur a piece of outside information. And those of you that have looked at the 2016 document, or 2016 DBQ that was talking about the rise of the women's rights movement, document 1 was of a female who was typing. And so a lot of the kids, the piece of outside information that they spurred from that was Rose the Riveter. Well, if you only talk about Rose the Riveter as another example of women working, that's historical context. That's hipping the document. To really use Rose the Riveter properly for outside information, you have to then talk about how did the shift in women's roles in working change because of World War II and because of this. And so then you could talk about Rose of the River, and you can talk about machine and operating and building tanks, guns, and planes, and all the stuff that we use, and how that's going to lead to other opportunities later on. You just can't talk about women working tied to like document 1. So make sure the students, whatever piece of outside information that they're using that is completely outside the documents, that they're not using something that's literally listed in the document. The hipping. Good news on the hipping. The students only have to hip 3 documents, but I'm going to tell my students they must hip at least 4 documents. I'm going to have my students say this particular phrase, the historical context of, and whatever the document is, And so they'll explain that, and then they must explain why. How does it help to answer the question? So if the particular document was the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, this is the historical context of the Declaration of Independence is, and you talk about it, and why. How does that help to answer the question? So this should take 2 sentences in hipping the documents. To do this, you know, if you add it up, there's 6 sentences to get this 1 point. This should be done all in your body paragraphs. Avoid hipping data documents. I think most students screw up data documents. They misinterpret the data documents. So I would tell the students to shy away from that. Also, the students don't have to HIPP all 3 documents. They could H or I or P the documents. I think purpose is one of the easier skills, in my opinion. I think point of view is one of the more difficult skills. To know the point of view of an author, you got to know a lot about the author and stuff. And so if you don't know that, it could be very difficult to actually get the point of view hipping skill. I showed these during my summer institute, so you could use these as hipping practice for your students and just see what they know. The whole flag that was coming in and how the states were coming in so quickly that they just sewed these other 4 particular stars on, and those 4 stars represent Iowa, Wisconsin, California, and Minnesota. This is just a note from my roommate that said, don't explain the purpose of the document by saying it really fits well with the other 6 documents. That is not the purpose of a document. The purpose of a document is, why was it created? What's the purpose of the document? And so, according to my roommate, 15 to 20% of the DBQs that he scored included this, said this is what they were saying. So it's just misinterpreted by kids that were doing the purpose skill of that hipping. Here's the reasoning point. As you can see, on this particular reasoning point, I didn't bold it. I should have bolded the second one. I am also doing that, explaining both similarities and differences. I'm going to have my students group the documents to say, hey, these are similarities and these are differences, or these are continuities and these are changes, or do multiple causes, or they got to explain both cause and effect. I'm going to have them do that in their body paragraphs, and then I'm going to have them do a synthesis. And if you read those other ones, some of those other ones, I hope when the College Board releases some of the examples, we'll get a better understanding of those other ones. But they seem a little more difficult, a little more higher level. And so, again, I realize that when writing the DBQ and the long essay, these are first draft essays. And so you have teenagers that are writing these essays under a lot of pressure, and they're timed. They don't get to have books with them and stuff like that. It's all out of their head, and so it's difficult for the kids. So I'm going to try to make it, I stick with the KISS principle, kind of keep it simple, stupid, and so I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible for my students. I'm going to stick with this 20-minute planning guide, as you can see, with contextualization. I did mention in my APSIs that one of my students I thought had a pretty good idea. They said maybe write the contextualization on into their pink booklets, their writing booklets, as they think of it. That's not a bad idea, you know. So that would actually, instead of 1 minute, it'd be almost like 5 minutes. So you're writing your contextualization, and then you do the rest of the planning. Notice the reasoning one, where the kids have to group the documents. I think that's one of the most difficult. That's what I call the first skimming through the documents. The kids are going to skim through the documents and group the documents according to the reasoning skill. So what are the similarities, what are the differences, what are the continuities, what are the changes? And so you got to have both. And so you can have 2, and I'm going to almost go 2 to 1. We have 2 groups for one reasoning skill and 1 group for the opposite. So if it's a change DBQ, they're going to have 2 changes, 2 groups that are changes, and 1 group that is a continuity. If it's a difference essay, so what are the differences that are going on between the Chesapeake region and that and the New England region? They're going to find the 2 differences, and then they'll have 1 similarity group. And then, as you will notice, those of you that were with me this summer, that planning guide right there, the good day to use Yacht's outline, I tweaked the second row or the second column. There's a group name. I then put in the document numbers, which was there originally, but I've added the reasoning skill. So the kids remind themselves, what reasoning skill am I talking about here? Am I talking about, when I'm talking about, let's say the first one is document 1. When I'm talking about document 1, am I talking about similarities or differences? Just so the kids have that. Notice on the topic column, if perchance on a DBQ they were to give students topics, I then make sure that the kids are going to list those topics there. Like if they were to talk about, hey, talk about the political and economic effects of something, then they must remind themselves when covering each document, which topic are you going to talk about? Then the usage point, the kids are going to go through and circle or underline the stuff they're going to use for usage. Hipping, determine which documents that they're going to hip, and then finally, which documents are they going to bring outside information. Notice on the outside information, I didn't emphasize this before, College Board is still requiring one piece of outside information. That is a very low bar, but it's a very difficult bar sometimes for students. Make sure your students use at least 2 or 3 pieces of outside information and explain how does that piece of outside information help to answer the question. It will help to solidify that point. Hipping, have your students hip 4 documents because they have to get 3 right. So have them hip 4 documents and finally have their synthesis and making sure that it relates to the question. DBQ first paragraph structure looks something like this. If you notice 7, 8, and 9, sentence 7, 8, and 9 are using the groups. So there's your first group, outline it. Second group, outline it. Third is going to outline the however, the other reasoning skills. So there is a difference I threw in here, which is called a parenthetical reference to your group. You might give the reader a heads up, like on group number 1, whatever the name is I'm going to be talking about documents 1, 4, and 7. So just parenthetical reference that, kind of give the reader, don't start discussing the documents there, but just give them maybe a parenthetical reference of, hey, this is the group, this is what I'm going to talk about. So when you're looking at paragraph 2, that's really sentence 7. Paragraph 3, that's 8, and paragraph 4 is going to be the 9th sentence. Body paragraphs look something like this. This hasn't changed much. I didn't change a whole lot since the summer, and so you will see this is kind of explains how to outline the different documents and how to explain them. You're explaining the group first, and you're explaining the document, then you're hipping the document, then you're bringing outside information, then you go to your next document. Notice if your group consists of 4 or 5 documents, which if you do, you might try to break that up a little bit, but if it does consist of 4 or 5 documents, break it up into 2 and 2, or break it up in 2 and 3, so you don't have this very massively long paragraph. There's a reasoning point again. This time I actually bolded both on that, so that's how I'm going to make sure the students are going to get that reasoning point. I think the cooperation is really going to come from that they're going to link the documents, they're going to group the documents, and they're going to group it on that reasoning skill. That's going to be their cooperation. They're corroborating the argument. They're making sure that the reader understands, hey, these 3 documents or these 2 documents go together. The one thing I say that a group does not consist of just 1 document. You must have 2 or more documents to actually make a group. This is my rubric for my DBQ, as you can see there. And finally, planning guide. This is those of you that were with me this summer. I did a planning guide for a particular essay that was between 1820 and 1848. And in doing so, I did some tweaks to it to kind of give you an idea. So again, I went through these first paragraph structures, so I'm going to kind of rush through this and show you again how to hip and all that stuff. So we're going through that paragraph. That was my planning for the particular DBQ. And I kind of shifted a little bit as far as, if you look at the bottom part of this, I put in the however, a major continuity during the time period. So I made sure, since the question was asking what changed, I got to have a continuity. So I made the continuity fighting for women's rights. That's going to continue both politically and economically during that time period. I continued to show, and I tweaked this a little bit. If you were with me this summer and you look at the bottom part of the essay, I kind of tweaked it just a little bit to show how I changed it, how that particular document changed, and how the format changed just a little bit, but not much. Suggestions for grading. When you're grading all these DBQs and you're grading all these essays, I tried to grade the first two long essays and grade the first DBQs. That means I'm bleeding all over them. My suggestion for grading is grade 10 a day. Those of you that have like over 100 plus students, if you have like 130 students and you grade 10 a day, that's going to take you 13 days to grade all the essays. That is the best way that I have found to do it. I wish I would have thought of it, but I had one of my colleagues that gave me that idea, and so I really appreciate it. And it does. You got to force yourself to grade these essays. I then, after that, I score the essays. I give them a rubric. I attach it. It kind of just shows which points that they got, and if they would like to discuss it in much greater detail, they can come before or after or during our advocate period to talk about it. I hope this helps in giving you some idea of how I'm going to teach my students this year to write both a long essay and the DBQ. That's 40% of their overall score on their AP US History essay. As I've stated before, a lot of kids in the past, the mean score on both of the essays has been 2 point something. Your goal should be on the long essay that the kids are getting 3, 4, 5, and on the DBQ they're getting 4, 5, 6. I hope this helped. And if you have any questions, you can email me at michael.yacht@leanderisd.org. Have a great day.